Hello again, everybody. Dr. Richard Smith here with the Foundation for the Study of Cycles and Cycles TV. Good to be with you all again. Thanks for joining us and getting very fired up about our upcoming Cycles in the City conference. Just a couple weeks away now, and I have been basically revolutionizing my understanding of cycles. I'm going to be giving what I hope will be an important talk in the history of the Foundation for the Study of Cycles that I think really changes the way we understand and think about cycles. So small claim, small aspiration, small ambition. What can I say? But I am really excited about it, and it all boils down to geometry. So I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit today about how my thinking has been evolving into this realm of geometry. Why? I've been talking about it for the past month or so with the complex numbers and I, the square root of -1. And I'm going to just share with you a little preview of that line of development here now, and then bring this kind of geometry framework to bear on what I think is the most important issue of our time in terms of markets, which is the primacy of the US dollar as the world reserve currency, how that's backed by the Treasury market, because T-bills, short-term treasuries in particular, serve as the collateral for the global financial system. That's how money flows. Short-term loans backed by treasuries, especially short-term treasuries, even overnight loans, etc. Treasuries are at the heart of the collateral of the debt loaded global financial system, which is a theme that we really developed over the past year, even before we started to get into some of these new ideas about how we should understand cycles and think about cycles. So this is the beginning of what I hope will be a longer investigation into how to understand what's going on in markets, what's going on in our world today through the lens of cycles, and as I'm learning how cycles actually encourage us to think in terms of geometry. So with that, thanks again for joining us today. I'm going to try to keep today tight and brief as I continue to get ready for Cycles in the City, which is going to be an awesome event, and look forward to sharing that with those who can attend, and then some more after the conference is over. So let's get going. All right. So a little preview of something I've been building to share at the conference, calling it the Mathematical Contemplation Suite. And, so I want to just start here by showing everybody, if you don't already know this, about how kind of I got on this direction, and what I learned from it and what you can learn from it too, right? So here's over here on the left side, okay, we have the numbers 1 and -1, right? So right now, if you look at them, they're just numbers, right? 1, a dot on the number line, and -1, a dot over here on the number line. 1 times -1, anything times -1, right? We'll take this dot over here from the positive side of the number line and put it over here on the negative side. So nothing really exciting about that. But the first big change is when we stop thinking about numbers as just dots And we start to think about them in terms of orientations, directions. This is where the geometry enters into the picture, right? It's not just a number, it's a direction, increasing or decreasing. Those are geometric concepts. They're not just numbers. They include direction. And so when you think about, one being a pointer from the origin in the direction, the positive direction, right? Then, and you think about -1 as being, the pointer in the negative direction. So you have this idea of -1 changes the direction of things. When you multiply something by -1, you change the direction by 180 degrees, right? So if you want to talk about the square root of -1, what do you do twice in order to flip something to the opposite direction, right? Instead of 180 degrees, half of that is 90 degrees. So this is the genesis of where this idea of I being the complex, the imaginary part of a complex number, this is where it came from, right? That the square root of -1, which is what I represents, is half of a full 180 degree rotation. So it's a 90 degree rotation, and it has a direction too, right? It's from here to here, and then from here to here. So we notice that I here, the square root of -1, is not a number on this line down here, like all the other numbers, all the real numbers. It constitutes something that comes out of the flat number line and actually points upward, introduces something that's outside of the number line, and it's the basis for this idea of rotation, right? And then you multiply by square root of -1 again, you get back down here, and you get back down here. So we are interested in cycles. We are the foundation for the study of cycles. We should be interested in I because it is about rotation, and it is something that has been being called imaginary. Where did that come from? Yet it's at the heart of cycles. So anybody who's been following cycles for a while know that the cycles community often gets put in a basket, the crazy basket of talking about things that aren't real, things that are imaginary. Well, here is the original imaginary, and it has everything to do with something that is very well defined mathematically, that is used in science, in physics, in quantum physics every day by everyone. And it's at the heart of quantum physics and many other things. It's at the heart of the tides. And here it is, clear as a bell in the math all along, rotation, cycles. So I find that very exciting and something worth building on. And when we start to really think geometrically, right, not just in terms of, this direction on this flat line out to the right or this direction, but no, we can start to think geometrically in 2 dimensions here. And so if we jump to the next little animation here, let me just let you watch this for a minute. I'll pause it. All right, so this is the familiar sine wave that we are looking at all the time in cycles land, right? Or cosine wave. They're just offset by 90 degrees. So what is this actually measuring here? What is this? At any point in time, it's the area here defined by these 2 vectors, U and V. And they have an angle between them, theta. So at this point in time, when we get up to, I can step through it here a little more. So when we're up at the top, at the peak of a sine wave, what we're saying is that the area between the two vectors here, U and V, the two phasors, is at its maximum. That's literally what it means. And then as we start to move past the 90-degree mark and the vectors widen out, the area of that parallelogram goes down. And it comes to this really interesting point right here where it is 0. And then it starts to go negative. Okay. And then it gets back to this very interesting point where bloop, it jumps back to the very beginning. Now on most of our cycle charts, right, we look at something that just keeps on going as a wavy line forward in time, but that's not how a cycle actually works. Cycles repeat. Cycles are closed orbits. And if you watch this now for just another minute, you'll get a sense that there's what is that moment right there when things flip back, right? So this is all part of starting to think about cycles in a more geometric way. For anybody who's interested in the math behind all this, this is called geometric algebra, and this right here is called a bivector. And you're probably saying, Dr. Smith, why are you burdening me with all of these math terms? Well, because if you want to understand cycles, you want to understand what's going on in our world through the lens of cycles. These are the basics, and they're not that complicated. There's lots of education out there on YouTube about geometric algebra, bivectors, etc. And everybody who wants to understand cycles needs to be looking into this stuff. And I'm going to be talking about it a lot more as we progress. So just to take us one more step into the rabbit hole here. Let me see if I can refresh this and start it over. Okay, well, that's all right. I will do the hard refresh. Okay, so here is the other story I've been talking about from geometry land, which is this idea of how the sun and the moon interact with each other to form the heights of the tide, the spring and neap tides, right? So here we have the same two phasors, the same two rotations going on. Okay, down here at the bottom. And then up here on the left, the top left, we see what happens when you add those two phasors together, right? M2 and S2. These are just equal at this point. This isn't actually the same thing as the tides, but they add together to form this green line here, and that is the spring and neap tides. So when they're both pointing in the same direction or in opposite directions, they form the spring tides, and as they get into a 90-degree relationship, they form the neap tides. So I think I can speed this up a little bit here just to get us a little further along. So we get down here to the neap tide, and boom. Okay. So if you look at these two vectors now, right, they're pointing, this one's pointing this way, and this one's pointing this way. So they're in opposition, and we're at the neap tide as opposed to the spring tide. So this is how cycles, right? These are cycles, right? These are orbiting things, closed orbits, cycles. And then this is how cycles are working together to amplify or de-amplify each other and producing the phenomena, particularly the wave interference phenomena that we observe, like the tides and also quantum measurements. They're quite different, but there's something similar about them. So this is all kind of the geometry. It's really not a rabbit hole. It's very illuminating. And why I think in the cycles community, we need to really start thinking more geometrically. So let me stop there now for just a minute. So I started out with rotation, right? I started out with with complex numbers, the imaginary part. I showed you how it originates the idea of rotation that is present in science and math all the time, right? And it is certainly a cycle. It's the definition of a cycle, actually. So, and then we're starting to look at how, once we find these cycles, then we can look at how they interact to produce the observations that we see in the real world, like the tides. So the sun and the moon transmitting gravity, their angular relationship with the earth produces the tide heights. Can we apply some kind of similar geometric understanding to markets to understand what's going on in our world, right? So now we can move a little bit to thinking about what's going on with treasuries as collateral. And to think about it, not just in terms of the Fed's balance sheet, right, which we can certainly look at, and that's part of what we are going to look at. But let me just see if anybody has any questions. Feel free to ask them if what I've presented so far isn't clear. Hopefully these illustrations, which I have worked very hard on, do help show what's going on, this new picture of how to think about cycles and what we can learn from cycles, right? I'm not throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. I'm saying there's something else for us to explore and discover together. All right, so let's go a little bit further here now. And, one of the things that's going on in the world, let me pop to full screen here. So this is what's called RESBAL, WRESBAL, at the Federal Reserve. Reserve balances with the Federal Reserve. So this is what the banks have parked at the Federal Reserve that they need to have for reserves at the Federal Reserve. So following the great financial crisis and COVID, right, the banks have to have lots of reserves at the Fed, so-called ample reserves. And let me just zoom in on this a little bit more because I really want to talk about just the latest number from the Fed. So the Fed has told us that $3 trillion is kind of the definition of ample reserves. And back in 2025, we first dropped below that 3 trillion line for the first time. So the Fed was letting its balance sheet run off and not buying more treasuries to replace its balance sheet, and the reserves came down to below $3 trillion. And then Jerome Powell said, yeah, I think we're going to start buying some more treasuries, probably short-term treasuries, because that's what the Treasury is selling. So what this means is that Treasury is still selling treasuries. Treasuries are still being issued. Treasury issuance is still happening. In fact, the federal debt is still growing by something like $2 trillion a year. And so Treasury has to sell paper. They have to sell treasuries. And the Fed was one of the biggest buyers of the treasuries, and they're not now. But they've started buying again because of the geometry of the Treasury market, right? The Treasury market is not an abstract thing that lives in some computational space. It's real buyers and sellers of treasuries in the world. And the Fed was one of them, is one of them. And so they've started buying a little more because somebody's got to buy, and the Fed has done enough not buying to cause some trouble in the Treasury market. So I've put together a little visual here. This is as of 2023 Q3. At the time, the publicly held debt was $26.35 trillion of treasuries, right? That's the amount of treasuries held by the public. And the public can be broken down into a lot of different categories. So, we have back in 2023 Q3, we had 7.5 trillion of that held by foreigners, right? And that was actually growing at the time, so it's green. The Federal Reserve held 5 trillion of it. And at the time, quarter over quarter, that was shrinking. So that's why this is red. Commercial banks held 4 trillion in treasuries, and they did not change from quarter to quarter. So they're gray. Households, $2.4 trillion. Mutual funds and ETFs, $2 trillion. Money market funds, $1.8 trillion. RRP, the reverse repo facility at the Federal Reserve, where money market funds park their cash sometimes and receive treasuries overnight when they don't want to be buying treasuries directly themselves. Pensions held $1 trillion, hedge funds $1 trillion, insurance $500 billion, and primary dealers $4 trillion. So that was the picture in 2023 Q3. Now we're going to jump to about a year later, 5 quarters later. Okay. And now the public debt has moved from 26.35 trillion to 28.83 trillion, 29 trillion, right? So in 5 quarters, gone up from, 26.35 to 28, $2.5 trillion. Woo! $500 billion every quarter just in new debt issued. $500 billion every quarter. So what happened here? Foreigners went from 7.5 trillion up to 8.5 trillion. So they were still buying. China, Russia, all the foreigners still buying our debt. Japan, right? I don't know which countries it was, country by country, but the foreigners were buying more. The Federal Reserve lowered their treasury holdings from 4.96 to 4.3. And commercial banks went from 4.0 to 4.4. So they raised their holdings, etc. So you can see here, money market funds went up, households added, mutual funds added, etc. And reverse repo facility at the Fed went down. The latest reading today is it's not today. This was the end of Q4 in 2025. $31 trillion. So that was just 4 quarters from Q4 2024 to Q4 2025. A neat $2 trillion, just $500 billion per quarter of new debt. And what do we see over that 1 year change? Okay. Foreigners actually holding more, $9.2 trillion instead of 8.5. So they've been adding. The Federal Reserve, went from 4.31 to 4.23. Commercial banks, 4.65 from 4.4. So they're up. So you can see year over year, money market funds up, households slightly up, but foreign holdings up the most. And that's very interesting because I'm not sure what's happening right now. Over the past 5 months, things may well have changed, but the narrative we've been getting is that foreigners aren't buying treasuries anymore. And that just doesn't appear to be true. So here we are today. No, sorry, here we are at the end of December, Q4 2025. And I show you this because this is a system, right? These are institutions, these are holders, these are buckets, and they're not just numbers. They have a relationship. They have to all hold this $31 trillion as of the end of Q4 2025 of debt. Okay. So they're not just separate numbers, they are in a geometric relationship to each other. This is the geometry of federal debt right here. It's the beginning of it's the recognition that there is a geometry of federal debt, because we don't think of it in terms of geometry, but the geometry matters. If the foreigners really do stop buying treasuries, okay, then these other buckets have to pick up the slack, or a new bucket has to be found. Who's going to be buying treasuries? Most likely, it's going to be the Federal Reserve. That's the easiest bucket to fill up if the foreigners stop buying, or if the money market funds stop buying. So let me come back now. I've moved from cycles as just waves on a chart over time to thinking about cycles in terms of geometry. I got there in terms of thinking about the fundamentals of rotation when it comes to math and science, the imaginary part of the complex numbers. I connected that to the tides, started to look at, wow, it's really interesting how the sun and the moon work together to influence the tide heights. And so I started to think more geometrically, and the more I get into thinking geometrically, the more I realize that's how the world really works. The world is not an abstract math problem. It's real entities, people, corporations, institutions doing something with stuff. And so we can start to look at what those relationships are. And so we know right now that treasuries are the collateral of the global financial system. They are essentially the US dollar and the underpinnings of the US dollar's role as the world reserve currency. If that changes, if the US dollar as the world's reserve currency gets called into question, so far, I'm not seeing it. But clearly, the debt level in the United States is a concern for anybody that wants to buy more debt that the United States is selling. Will the United States be able to continue making payments on its debt? Is coming into question. And not just because of will we be able to keep making payments, but do these other countries, entities, institutions want to be in partnership with the US government? I think that's being called into question more because, for example, the Treasury wields its power through sanctions, and how many other entities are willing to be take the risk of being sanctioned. So that's kind of the picture. I think when we think about it geometrically, which again arrived at geometry through cycles, we start to get some new ideas, to ask some new questions. That's really the heart of it for me. Thinking this way helps us to ask different questions about what's going on. And that's where I think cycles are pointing. That's where I think the foundation for the study of cycles is going. Asking new questions, better questions, questions rooted in cycles, which cycles are rooted in geometry. It's simple. Go back to what I showed you at the beginning about the square root of -1, right? It's not just on the number line. It comes up out of the number line and introduces relationships between things that are pointing in different directions, things that have orientation. So this is just part 1 of what I hope will be a many-part series to unlock and unpack what cycles and geometry can really help us to understand about what's going on in the world. But I think even at this level, the picture clears up a lot. There's a lot going on with the dollar, with the petrodollar, with the tension around the Strait of Hormuz. And this is all connected to Treasury issuance. Who's going to be the buyer of Treasuries so that the U.S. can keep expanding its debt at $2 trillion a year? Because that is the status quo for the dollar remaining the world's reserve currency. So even just right there, that's a remarkable picture to understand that I think really helps to understand what's going on in the world today and to make sure we're asking the right questions. So I look forward to continuing to develop this theme, to working on it with you all and the members of the Foundation for the Study of Cycles, and to certainly be talking about it a lot at our upcoming Cycles in the City conference. So thank you, everybody, for your support. And I am getting some questions here. So hello, everybody. Thank you for letting me know where you're at. Thank you. Appreciate the feedback, everybody. Cruised up St. Mary's, Georgia, and prep for Cycles in the City. All right, Earl, looking forward to seeing you there. All right, boat stays in Georgia. Which bucket holds a stable coin? So stable coins I did think about stable coins, Earl. I think they're in here, but stable coins are very small right now. They might be like $200 billion. So not a meaningful weight, on that. The idea there were springs, connected to a rod at the top, which represents the Treasury issuance. But stable coins are very small right now. They're not a meaningful contributor to the behavior of all those weights. But great question. I think the stable coin story is a story of finding the next marginal buyer for Treasuries. I really do. So I think that is a good framework for understanding the stable coin story. Treasury is looking for new buyers of Treasuries because they got more Treasuries to sell. And stable coins do allow foreign entities and U.S. entities to essentially buy Treasuries. Yes, I will be YouTubing about geometric algebra. Absolutely. Got to talk about it. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Some great resources. There is a great series on geometric algebra by, I can't even pronounce the name, Sudi Glauco or something like that. It's a long series on geometric algebra, SUDYGLACOE. Check it out. And the 3 blue, 1 brown, Grant Sanderson is just amazing on this stuff. Really worth watching how he breaks down Fourier analysis, linear algebra. All this stuff has a lot of intuitive information in it. It's just presented to us in a terrible way in our institutions. But people like Grant Sanderson and 3 blue, 1 brown, if you haven't seen it yet, are really amazing at really connecting these mathematical concepts with our intuition. And if anything, like a huge takeaway from all this is that our intuition is right. It matters. it is something, and it's different than what AI has. AI does not have geometric intuition. You do. I hope you're doing well. Can we check the Saudi market? TASI. Sure, we can have a quick look if I can find it. Doesn't have the banks. The duty to buy. You know, the banks do have some obligations there, especially the Federal Reserve family of banks. If the banks follow their duty to buy, then liquidity will be taken from the stock market, right? I think that may be right. So again, I'm unpacking this story. We're unpacking it together. I don't have all the answers right now. I have some new questions, and I think new questions are very good and very important. We need new questions, absolutely. So good thesis, Franz, and we'll continue to explore that as we progress. So if I can, let me see if I can fulfill this request. Data set not found. Oh, simple search. Not seeing it as a ticker TASI. Yeah. All right. Sorry, I don't have that. Can look at Saudi Arabia ETF, MSAP. Big cycle here. It's 225, but not a lot of definition on its edges. This 139 looks more interesting, and the 63. If you put all those together, all the top 4 cycles by stability, still looks bearish, with possibly coming into a bottom in first week or 2 of June, but momentum is pointing up. So I'd say some reason for mild optimism there, but no rush. All right, gang. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for supporting the Foundation for the Study of Cycles. Please do make sure you're subscribed to our channel, that you like our videos. Helps us with YouTube so we can reach more people with this fantastic work. Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you in New York City. But if not, I'll see you in a few weeks back here on YouTube again. Take care, everybody. Be careful out there.
Cycles matter because they show us the future. Nothing else shows us a future path. Nothing that I've ever found in over 60 years of doing this.
Foundation is bigger than markets, right? It started out bigger than markets. It's still bigger than markets. It's bigger than us.
There is no such thing as a black swan. It is merely a cycle that was not forecast or anticipated.
To me, it's huge. If I can get a glimpse of the future, just a little bit of the future, I'm way ahead.
I think that the Foundation for the Study of Cycles has a role to play in both bringing technology to the world, but also really emphasizing agency and human agency.